Hello, my name is Osman Fire, and welcome to yet another Shannara book review. Or, I don't know, review seems like the wrong word, because review sounds like it's structured and intelligent and coherent. These aren't really coherent. They're mostly just me rambling my basic thoughts as I talk about books that I just happen to read. But in this case, you know what? This ramble might be kind of justified. Because Bearers of the Black Staff actually isn't that bad. It's a little better than I remember. Though I think let me caveat that slightly. I think that my ultimate conclusion is going to be almost identical to what it was back when I read this, I don't know, 14 years ago or something like that. You know, it's like I feel like my ultimate conclusion is going to be almost exactly the same because I can already sense it. I can already sense it in the back of my brain. My feelings on the book just turning out this duology turning out exactly the same. Because I get this out of the way. The book's actually surprisingly well written. Compared to Genesis, which, like I said, I ended up without even realizing it, I just ended up picking it apart and tearing it to shreds. This is solid. And I think this is solid actually because the scale is way down. The scale is way back to where it used to be, you know, like the number of characters we're dealing with and the amount of perspectives we're dealing with. And the overall, like, world is, you know, like the scope of the world and all the idea and all the world building is back down to a more manageable scope. And I think that is actually where Terry thrives a little more. Not that he can't do bigger than this. He absolutely did, you know, with the original Shannara trilogy and Heritage and all that. But, you know, it's like part of the reason the Voyage of the Jor Shannara and High Druid are so solid is because High Druid I guess is kind of bigger. But on the other hand, I think in High Druid he also did a better job of like parsing out what parts of the story got more attention. You know, more attention is just given to Grianne and the quest to save her than it is given to the war on the Prekendoran. And the Voyage of Jor Shannara is entirely focused around a single adventure that kind of branches off into multiple mini adventures, you know, in the second and third books. You know, so I think in the grand scheme of things, the scale is different compared to like how big in scope the Genesis was and how badly he fumbled Genesis, honestly. Or take Word in the Void. Word in the Void is a really small scale, and he does that really well. Word in the Void still is fantastic. As far as Legend of Shannara, though, as far as Bearers of the Black Staff specifically, I should say, it feels very solid. You know, we only have a handful of perspective characters. You know, we're not trying to get a million characters into a book the same length as, you know, each of the Genesis books. And I think overall the story is pretty okay. At the very least, the story itself is well paced. I do have some issues, but on the whole, I think the story is very well paced. I also think that he did a really good job of the names in this. I don't know. There's something about the names in this story, like Frina Amarantine or Cider Ament, Pantera Q. I just think I think a lot of these Qs. A lot of these names are really good, except Prulis. I don't like Prulis. The name makes me uncomfortable for some reason. It doesn't sound right in my ears. But on the whole though, I like the character names. I like the way he portrays the valley on the whole. And that it's like become just a very relatively stable society, but this is where one of my complaints actually kind of jump off a little bit. He created a relatively, you know, stable society that's lived in peace and prosperity, relative prosperity, and free of the plagues of the outer world. Still overuses the word poisons, by the way. And I just like it. I like the contrast of the world inside the valley versus the world outside of the valley. Though I can't help but wonder if the world outside of the valley is still a little bit too sick, given that it has been half a millennium since World War III. You know, it's like 2580 out there now. It's like 2580 now. It's like I understand that, you know, radiation and chemicals and stuff are going to linger for an extremely long time. But I just have certain doubts about the idea that that the world wouldn't be a little more regrown than it is. It's still mostly, he does mention that there are, and I missed this actually. He does mention, when I first read it, I should say. I missed it when I first read it. He does mention that there are patches here and there of actual, like, forests and so forth, and places where the land is actually recovered a bit. But it's still mostly a blasted wasteland. And I don't know, I'm not convinced that, especially so remote, because remember, we're in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, you know, the Shannara series. The Four Lands are located somewhere in, you know, the northwestern United States, southwestern Canada. You know, so a lot of these places would not have been directly affected by nuclear bombardment or chemical warfare. You know, they're too isolated, and there's no point in dropping nukes and you know, mustard gas and whatever else in the middle of this, you know, in the middle of the forest of the Rocky Mountains in Yellowstone National Park. You know, so I'm a little doubtful that the immediate area around the valley itself should actually be all that bad off anymore. But that's kind of whatever. But I guess I should get into the thing that I was hinting at. The thing that bothered me about the nature of the valley's residents. And that is, at this precise point in time when the walls fail, it strikes me as really weird that there just so happens to be a bunch of people around that can plot and scheme and undermine the you know, the quest of our heroes. I think that's so weird, because the valley's population has to be really small. It has to be. I can't imagine it's any greater than, you know, a few 100,000. You know, elves, trolls, spiders. Are the spiders and gnomes, by the way? I never got that. I've never got totally clear on that one. You know, and humans combined, though. I can't imagine it gets any, I don't even imagine it's anywhere near 1 million. I imagine it's only a few 100,000 people all told. And that even sounds a touch bold. I feel like in his head, at least, you know, Terry probably thought it was kind of small. But I feel like over time, populations do have to, you know, do grow. You know, if assuming that nothing catastrophic happens. But anyway, I find it really coincidental that someone like Skeel Isla, or Isle, the leader of the Children of the Hawk, the cult that formed in the aftermath of Hawk saving everybody, and is sold the wife of the king who, you know, gets assassinated because of her scheming. You know, it seems very weird to me that these people who would be scheming behind the scenes just so happen to be all in place at the right time to take advantage of the walls failing. I just thought that was kind of like, that feels like a bit of a stretch, feels like a bit of a coincidence, you know? I feel like on some level, I would have much preferred just a more straightforward story about the people of the valley just having to hold off the Druge clan, the Troll Druge clan. I think that would have been a lot more just, not interesting necessarily, but it would have felt like there was less forced conflict. Because the big problem is that they have an external threat and they have two internal threats, you know, to deal with in the current situation. You know, they have multiple threats to deal with, and two of them are internal as opposed to, you know, more external threats and internal threats. And I think I would have preferred on some level a story that was a little bit more focused on, you know, on them dealing with the external threats rather than really what feels like contriving a way to make the story have more drama, you know? I think there's nothing wrong with the story being a little more simple, being a little more like the Sword of Shannara or the Elfstones of Shannara, you know? Where there isn't a whole lot that anyone is... there's a whole lot anyone's worrying about behind them. It's all the threats in front of them. It'd be nice to switch back to that a little bit, you know? As opposed to having infiltrators everywhere and all that stuff. It's just me. It doesn't much appeal to me anymore, because I just feel like it gets kind of overused, and I feel like maybe this is reflecting in my head for the future, where I feel like Terry overuses the same tropes, the same plot points, the same kinds of characters over and over again as the series gets older and older. And that's, it's kind of disappointing in its way. It's kind of disappointing because it would be nice to just get like stories that vary a little bit more. Oh, thank you, phone, for it. Oh, would you look at that? There's a spam phone call from Virginia on my phone. That's delightful. Anyway, so I only ever get spam phone calls anyway, so. But, what was that? What was that? Anyway. And low-key, that kind of leads me to the other thing that kind of vaguely bothers me. And this is going to get a little bit more into the real-world implications of things. But it's the Children of the Hawk. The cult that sprung up in the aftermath of Hawks. Saving everyone. The gypsy morph, the creature of magic. Saving everybody. And the thing that I don't fully like about it is that it feels very much like the way the cult works basically is that basically a bunch of myths have sprung up around Hawk, and that Hawk is and the main sect is that says that that Hawk is going to return. The Hawk, as they call them, is going to return when the walls fail. And of course that's not what's going to happen, because that's not how anything works. And the thing that bothered me about it is the fact that it feels very much like how liberal atheists, very specifically liberal atheists, people who don't believe in the supernatural, who don't believe in any religion or anything, believe that religion comes about. Their assumption is that everyone who lived 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago were all too stupid to understand things they were seeing in front of them. And bear in mind, I'm saying this from the perspective of someone who does believe in the supernatural and does believe in God. Right? And bear in mind, I am saying it from this perspective. But this feels very much like it's written from the perspective of someone who doesn't believe in those things. I don't think Terry Brooks does. But it's very much written from the perspective of someone who doesn't believe these things. And the way he talks about them is basically they believe that, say, Christianity probably being the best example here. Jesus was obviously an actual person, much like Hawk was. And they believe that a bunch of myths and tall tales got conjured up around Jesus, and none of that actually happened because they don't believe in the supernatural. And it's the same thing with Hawk, though of course in the case of the Shannara, the supernatural does very much exist. Magic does very much exist. There are literally Knights of the Word still running around to this day. And I think it just comes across as a little absurd that a cult or a religion, as it were, a religion that's so obviously and clearly wrong in a way that is very obviously wrong, just kind of sprang up. It just doesn't seem plausible to me at all. Because there's no way that Hawk himself, who was a real person, mind you, would have made those claims that he was going to return when the walls fell. Someone just made it up out of whole cloth. And I know that's what atheists think about the founding of any major or minor religion, that they think that basically that Christianity is no different from Jim Jones's cult, back in the late 80s. And it's like I just find that just kind of, it grates against me, because it grates against my own inner, how I understand how religion, and I'm not saying religion specifically as in Christianity, I'm talking about religions in general. Even if you concede the idea that there's a lot of embellishment and absurdity gets inserted into religion over time, religion does have to come from some sort of actual truth. And obviously the truth here, in the case of the Children of the Hawk, is, the fact that Hawk did in fact deliver people, did deliver a group of people, a couple thousand people from the horrors of, World War III. But the simple fact of the matter is, to me anyway, that what they believe is so completely out of line with what actually happened that there's no way it would ever come about. Because you're also talking about people who aren't just like passing down. And same thing like with like Christianity or Islam or whatever, or Judaism even. It's not like you're talking about people whose religions are being passed down by word of mouth through storytellers. We're talking about people who literally are capable of writing down records and are literally capable of recording what is happening. Which actually brings me back to an old point I made some series ago, which is that there's a distinct lack of carryover knowledge from the old world to the new in Shannara. The simple fact of the matter is, when records are written down, assuming that people write down records, they do whatever they can to preserve those records. They don't just let the records disappear into the ether and you never remember how to do anything ever again. We know a whole lot about the Roman Empire simply because they wrote that shit down. They wrote that stuff down, and then, the Catholic Church in particular did a whole heck of a lot to preserve that knowledge. Even if they didn't necessarily use it, though, contrary to popular belief, the medieval era was a lot more advanced than the classical Roman era. But they took the knowledge the Romans had and they built upon that. It wasn't just this notion. It wasn't just like everything fell apart after Rome fell. No, generally speaking, human technology and understanding kind of continued on from the Roman Empire. There is maybe it stagnated a bit because of the collapse of Rome, but it didn't just all disappear into the Dark Ages like you're taught. But where was I going with that? I kind of got off onto a total tangent. I'm like 100% on a total tangent right now. That's incredible. Also, just totally received a Facebook message. I'm pretty sure. Yep, that's great. Thanks. But the simple fact of the matter is, coming out of World War III, out of the Great Wars as they're called. There's a lot of people in the Valley who know how to write. And there's obviously going to be some people who are not only going to write down new records, but they're also going to keep the old records. They're going to keep the history of the 20th century and the 15th century and the Roman Empire. Surely someone had some books with them when they retreated into the valley. Maybe not a lot, but surely someone did. Surely someone had some of the accumulated knowledge of the world. Because this is what I was complaining about back in the Voyage of Gerald Shannara, I think. Is the notion that, that the only information that existed of the old world was located in computers. Like, no, someone had to have books still. Someone still had to, maybe they had a random assortment of books, and maybe a couple of those books were The Cat in the Hat and Green Eggs and Ham. But at the end of the day, it's like, no, someone probably still had some technical manuals. They probably still had some history books, because there are people obviously who absolutely love to read. And this is why I'm honestly kind of also, again, irritated low-key about the idea that from Genesis, my complaints about Genesis, about like everyone just retreating into compounds and everything. Those compounds had to have some of that knowledge too. And some people had to have escaped from the compounds. It's not like everyone 100% across the United States was going to die. Like I said, the logic and the verisimilitude of the story it doesn't hold up when you like really kind of hold it up to some logical scrutiny, and it just really frustrates me. It's like, no, people should know a few more things than they do in Shannara, And especially that once the Druids get found, and I'm gonna have a complaint about that when I review the whole 2-book series. I might make that into one uber long video reviewing the second and the series as a whole. But when you have people dedicated to preserving knowledge, the idea that all this knowledge would be lost, you would think the elves, by the way, would have some of this knowledge too. Are you really telling me the elves didn't record anything about human history? Maybe very derisively, but you're telling me they didn't really record anything about human history in the time they were in hiding? I'm a little bit, no, that's not. People want to preserve knowledge. They don't just let it fall by the wayside. just because. You know, some people, there will be people out there who are historians who are going to try and preserve all the knowledge that they can. And a lot of it's going to be lost, but some of it will be out there. But to tie it back to what my original point about the Children of the Hawk, the simple fact of the matter is, even if you think that, you know, the Romans or the Egyptians are too stupid to accurately record information, the simple fact of the matter is, guess what? We're talking about people from 2080 who are modern people who would absolutely have the wherewithal to accurately record information. I'm just not convinced that a cult like the Children of the Hawk would really rise up. I'm just not convinced by that. I just find that highly implausible that, like, some sort of religion would crop up, but it wouldn't believe the precise things that it believes. It wouldn't, you know, maybe it got fused with the Bible or something. That seems to be the most plausible idea, but because Terry's never explicit about it, and frankly, I just assume that real-world religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, etc., pretty much all entirely died out with the old world, since the death of the old world means that, any any profound belief in the old world religions just wouldn't matter. They basically, all the old religions, except for maybe the Eastern ones like Hinduism, Buddhism, and so forth, would have been disproven. The Semitic religions and so forth would have been completely disproven the way things turned out in the Shannara series. So no one would believe, in Christianity anymore. No one believed in that, and no one believed that stuff anymore. So I don't think anyone really would be taking the Bible seriously, or taking the Bible as a way to make sense of what Hawk did. Because I know people, and I'll even give you the caveat that, yes, it is possible that someone could have tried to fit what happened with the Valley into the paradigm of the Bible, but it just doesn't work. If you spend any time reading the Bible, it's like, no, none of this stuff makes sense anymore, because that would imply that that Hawk would be the return of Christ, to the world in Revelation, but then that would mean he would be returning a third time. No, it's like you can't fit it in. It's its own religion. I don't think that real world religion is much of a factor in Terry's mind here. And if it is, then he's not wise enough to utilize it effectively in his narrative. He doesn't know or understand enough about Christianity or whatever, to utilize them effectively in his narrative. That was a much longer tangent on that than I thought it would be. I'm not gonna lie, I actually anticipated I would talk a little bit less about it, but here we are. I've been talking for almost 25 minutes now about one book, and again, it's a book that I kind of like, but I'm very much thinking that I'm gonna have the exact same opinion I did when I first read it, which is that this is a super unnecessary story, and while it's not bad, it's not really good enough to warrant being a 2-book series. You get the sense that all the extra padding with the Isolde betraying the king and Skeel Isla, plotting with her to gain power in the Valley. In the end, it all just feels kind of like it's just contrived to make the story last longer. And I'm just like, he should have written something a little different. And I have an idea for that actually, but I'll do that with the summary video for this. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment. You know the drill. And until next time, everybody,